Have you ever locked eyes with someone across a room and felt your entire world rearrange? Your heart doesn't just speed up, it opens like a trapdoor. Time dilates. The conversation around you turns to static. You're not thinking anything coherent, but your body knows something. This person, this moment. Destiny has just walked in wearing someone else's face. You feel an uncanny recognition, as if you've been waiting for them without knowing it. I feel like I've always known you, you might say on the second date, and you mean it. The sensation is so powerful, so immediate, that questioning it feels like doubting gravity. This is what people write songs about. This is what the word soulmate was invented to describe. But here's what's actually happening in that moment. You're not recognizing them. You're recognizing yourself. The intensity you're feeling, that magnetic pull that overrides every rational thought, is your psyche catching sight of its own reflection. What you think you see in their eyes is actually the projection of contents from your own unconscious, made suddenly, startlingly visible on another person's face. Depth psychologist Carl Jung called this phenomenon projection of the soul image. The moment when internal figures you've never consciously met suddenly appear externalized, wearing someone else's skin. And here's the pattern you already know, but haven't named yet. You keep choosing the same person in different bodies. Your type isn't a preference. It's a psychological red flag. Evidence that something in your unconscious is running mate selection without consulting your conscious mind. The distant one who makes you work for attention. The chaotic one whose instability feels electric. The critical one whose approval you're still earning. Different faces, same fundamental wound. You've probably noticed that these relationships follow a script. The overwhelming beginning. The slow revelation that they're not who you thought. The painful ending that somehow feels familiar, like you've lived it before because you have. Not just with past partners, but with the original architects of your attachment patterns, back when you were too small to choose differently. This isn't about bad luck. This isn't about picking the wrong people. This is your psyche trying to stage a play. It's been rehearsing since childhood, casting actors who can perform the roles your unconscious wrote years ago. Every intense attraction is an invitation, not to a relationship, but to an unfinished psychological drama your body still needs to resolve. What you're about to discover in this exploration is the architecture beneath chemistry. We're going to examine the inner figures, the anima in men, the animus in women, that silently direct your attractions before you consciously register them. We'll trace how early wounds encode themselves in your nervous system as templates for what love should feel like. And we'll distinguish between two fundamentally different experiences you've been conflating. The compulsive pull toward familiar pain and the quiet recognition of actual compatibility. By the end, you'll understand why the relationships that destroy you feel like destiny. And more importantly, you'll learn to read attraction as diagnostic information rather than divine instruction. The first step toward choosing consciousness over chemistry. That recognition you felt, the sense of knowing someone before you've met them, isn't magic. It's mechanism. Before you ever saw their face, there was already an image waiting in your psyche, a template, a photograph, developing in the darkroom of your unconscious. This image has been directing your attractions your entire adult life, and you've never consciously met it. Jung called this figure the anima in men, the animus in women. These are the contrasexual archetypes, inherited images of the opposite sex that live inside you, autonomous and active, shaping whom you find compelling before your conscious mind registers a single thought. Every man carries within him the eternal image of woman, Jung wrote in The Development of Personality. Not the image of this or that particular woman, but a definite feminine image. This isn't metaphor. This is functional architecture. The anima represents a man's feeling function, his capacity for emotional depth, creativity, intuition, the sense that life means something beyond achievement and control. Jungian analyst Robert Johnson observed that almost all of a man's sense of value, worth, safety, joy, and contentment derive from his inner feminine nature. When this figure remains unconscious, she operates like an autonomous personality within him, hijacking his attention whenever someone in the external world approximately matches her contours. The animus represents a woman's logos, her capacity for structure, judgment, decisive action, the ability to think clearly and move decisively through the world. When unconscious, this figure speaks in her head with pronouncements and opinions and drives her toward men who can carry the authority and direction she hasn't yet claimed as her own. These inner figures develop through stages, each representing a deeper level of psychological differentiation. Mythologist Erich Neumann mapped the anima's evolution from Eve, the biological mother who represents material security and survival, to Helen, the romantic muse who inspires art and passion. Then to Mary, the spiritual beloved who promises transcendence and purity. Finally to Sophia, the integrated wisdom figure who represents psychological wholeness rather than projected divinity. Most people never progress past Helen. They spend their lives chasing romantic intensity, casting partners as muses who will give their existence meaning, never recognizing that the meaning they seek is an internal developmental task, not an external acquisition. When you choose a partner to carry an earlier developmental stage of your anima or animus, the relationship is structurally doomed. You're asking them to be your mother, your muse, your savior, roles that feel thrilling during projection, but become suffocating when the person underneath tries to breathe. They will inevitably disappoint you, not because they failed, but because you've cast them in a part no human can sustain. And here's where projection becomes possession. When your inner figure seizes your consciousness, the person before you transforms. They become luminous, numinous, somehow more real than everyone else in the room. Their voice sounds like it's speaking directly to your soul because, in a sense, it is. You're hearing your own unlived depths reflected back through their presence. "I've always known you" is a true statement, but not in the way you think. You've always known this figure. Internally, what you're recognizing in this external person is your own disowned contents. The feeling capacity you've never developed, the assertive energy you've never claimed, the creative depths you've never explored, suddenly made visible on someone else's face. This is why the attraction feels sacred. You're not falling for them. You're falling for the externalized image of your own unconscious, projected onto a human being who happens to match the template closely enough to carry the weight of your soul's longing. They never asked for this role, and they can never fulfill it, because what you're seeking isn't in them, it's in you, waiting to be integrated rather than perpetually pursued in another's eyes. But archetypal templates alone don't explain why you're drawn to this specific person rather than anyone who approximately matches the anima or animus image. There's another layer determining whom those templates will recognize as a match. The specific wounds encoded in your body from the first relationships that taught you what intimacy means. Freud called this repetition compulsion, Wiederholungszwang, the unconscious drive to recreate painful patterns in an attempt to master them. He observed patients who seemed pursued by a malignant fate, men whose benefactors invariably betrayed them, women whose love affairs all ran through identical phases and arrived at identical endings. These weren't accidents. These were ritualized returns to unresolved trauma, the psyche staging the same play with different actors, hoping unconsciously that this time the ending will be different. It never is, not through repetition alone. What Freud identified psychoanalytically, contemporary neuroscience validates somatically. Trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk discovered that trauma is stored in the body in the form of physical sensations. Not as narrative memory you can recall and examine, but as implicit memory your nervous system carries without your conscious awareness. Your body remembers the emotional climate of your earliest attachments, the distance, the volatility, the conditional approval, the unpredictable rage, and it steers you below the level of conscious choice toward relational configurations that match those templates. This is why insight doesn't change the pattern. You can know intellectually that you're attracted to emotionally unavailable partners. You can articulate perfectly why the critical voice in a lover's tone triggers your childhood wound around a shaming parent. And still, your body will move toward the familiar architecture of that pain, because familiar equals safe to a nervous system that calibrated itself in chaos. Psychologist Mary Ainsworth's research on attachment identified the cognitive frameworks, internal working models, that form during infancy based on caregiver responsiveness. Sensitive, consistent caregiving produces a model of self as worthy and others as trustworthy. Insensitive, inconsistent caregiving produces the opposite, a model of self as undeserving and others as unreliable or threatening. These models operate automatically in adulthood, beneath conscious awareness, determining what feels like home in intimate relationship. When your early environment was chaotic, your sympathetic nervous system learned to maintain a higher baseline activation. Calm doesn't feel peaceful. It feels eerie, like the quiet before something breaks. Researcher Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory explains this through neuroception, the nervous system's automatic pre-conscious evaluation of environmental safety. Early trauma miscalibrates this system, teaching it to interpret danger as safety and safety as danger. The intensity you feel during conflict, the adrenaline spike when someone pulls away, the way your heart races during an argument. Your body reads these signals as connection because this is what connection felt like when your nervous system was learning its fundamental patterns. But there's a deeper mechanism still, the autonomous complexes Jung identified through his word association experiments. When Jung presented stimulus words, father, mother, money, power, to patients, certain words triggered measurably longer response times and heightened physiological reactions. These delay points marked what Jung called feeling-toned complexes, clusters of unconscious thoughts, feelings, and behavioral patterns formed around significant life experiences, particularly with parents. A father complex doesn't just influence how you think about authority. It functions as an autonomous agent within your psyche, possessing its own aims and temporarily hijacking consciousness when triggered. A daughter who grew up with a harsh, critical father doesn't just remember that criticism. She carries an interior father animus complex that speaks in her thoughts with his voice, judges with his standards, and unconsciously selects partners who can perform his role in the external world. The man with an unresolved mother complex doesn't just have mommy issues. He treats women exactly as he treats his own interior feminine, with longing and resentment, idealization and contempt, desperate need and defensive withdrawal. He searches for his mother in every woman he meets, not because he's consciously attracted to maternal qualities, but because his anima, his soul image, is fused with his mother complex and has never differentiated into its own form. These complexes seek symbolic resolution. They scan potential partners for someone who can embody the original injury so the psyche can restage the trauma and attempt once more to win the love that was withheld, earn the approval that was always conditional, or finally be seen by the parent who looked through you. Your body believes, incorrectly, that if you can just get this person to stay, to choose you, to soften toward you, then the old wound will finally heal. It won't, because the person you need to reconcile with isn't standing in front of you. They're standing behind you, in your developmental history, waiting for you to turn around and face what was never finished. So you have the archetypal template, anima or animus, providing the image. You have the trauma patterns and complexes providing the specific features that image will recognize. And now you fall in love with someone who matches both. Except you don't fall in love with them. You fall in love with what Jungian analyst James Hollis called the magical other. The fantasy that there exists one person who will repair the ravages of your personal history, read your mind without you speaking, meet your deepest needs without you naming them, and make your life finally work. This person becomes the screen onto which you project your soul image, not a separate human being with their own interiority, but a supporting actor in the epic drama of your becoming whole. Johnson distinguished between two fundamentally different experiences that people conflate as love. There's romantic love, archetypal, illusory, saturated with projection, the experience of anima or animus possession. And there's human love, what Johnson called stirring the oatmeal, finding meaning in the mundane texture of shared life, in making breakfast together, in negotiating whose turn it is to take out the trash. One is a religious experience, the other is a relationship. The Western world believes that marriage should be based on falling in love, Johnson observed. And yet, that is an extremely poor basis for marriage. Falling in love is a religious experience. One has seen the goddess or the god in one's companion, and one cannot marry a god or goddess. But this is exactly what projection demands. That you marry divinity. That the person you're with becomes your savior, your muse, your source of meaning and aliveness. You're not asking them to be human. You're asking them to be the externalized solution to your internal fragmentation. When a man puts his anima into his marriage, Johnson wrote, he's putting his fantasy into his marriage and turning it into a series of archetypal scenes. His wife isn't a wife. She's the leading lady in a cosmic play he's been writing since childhood, and she never auditioned for the part. This is where the cultural scripts become dangerous. The mythology of Western romance, traceable to the medieval Tristan and Isolde myth, to the courtly love tradition where knights worshipped idealized ladies as spiritual symbols, has trained entire civilizations to mistake projection for proof of love. The love potion in the Tristan myth represents exactly this: uncontrollable, overwhelming, destined for tragedy because it was never about the actual people involved. It was about two individuals possessed by archetypal forces, each relating to their own inner figures rather than to each other. Every romantic comedy, every fairy tale, every love song that promises, "You complete me," reinforces the same delusional template, that wholeness comes from outside, that the right person will fix what's broken inside you, that suffering in love proves its depth. These narratives always end at the wedding, at the moment of union, because what comes after, the mundane reality of two separate people attempting to coexist, doesn't serve the fantasy. And then the mask slips. Reality intrudes. You see them tired, irritable, selfish, ordinary. You see them fail to intuit your needs, fail to provide the salvation you never articulated but absolutely expected. The projection begins to collapse under the weight of their actual humanness, and you're left with what Hollis described as the otherness of the other, a separate person who will not and cannot meet the largeness of the projections you've placed on them. Most people respond by rolling the projection onto the next solitary soul who approximately matches the template. They call the previous relationship a mistake. They say they've learned what they really need now. They meet someone new, feel that same surge of recognition, and mistake it once again for truth rather than repetition. The cycle continues until someone finally asks, "What if the person I need to meet isn't out there at all? What if the one I've been searching for is the one I've been running from? The unlived parts of myself I keep trying to find in someone else's eyes?" But projection doesn't only carry your unlived contrasexual qualities, your animus feeling depth, your animus's decisive clarity. It also carries your shadow, everything you've rejected, repressed, or disowned about yourself to become acceptable to the world that raised you. The shadow holds both what you consider negative, your greed, your envy, your capacity for cruelty and manipulation, and what you consider positive, but were taught to suppress, your creativity, your assertiveness, your sexual vitality, your right to take up space and make demands. These disowned qualities don't disappear. They live in your unconscious, waiting for someone in the external world who can carry them for you. Jungian analyst Connie Zweig described this as looking for the one, the shadow scanning potential partners for lost parts of yourself, believing unconsciously that if you can just get close enough to someone who embodies what you've rejected, you can recover the full range of your own personality without having to claim it directly. You meet someone confident, and you're magnetically drawn to their self-assurance because you've exiled your own. You meet someone emotionally expressive, and you're fascinated by their capacity to feel because you've armored against your own vulnerability. The qualities that attract you most intensely in early romance are often the exact qualities that will become sources of bitter conflict later. He's so strong and commanding because he's such a controlling power freak. She's so passionate and spontaneous because she's exhausting and unstable. The trait didn't change. Your relationship to your projection of it did. This creates what Zweig called shadow boxing. Painful, repetitive fights, where partners reject in each other the disowned qualities they can't tolerate in themselves. The man who prides himself on rationality and control attacks his partner's emotionality because her tears confront him with the feelings he's spent his life suppressing. The woman who sees herself as infinitely giving and selfless rages at her partner's selfishness because his boundary setting shows her the self-care she's denied herself. Sexual dynamics become the stage where shadow performs its most elaborate productions. The Madonna whore split exemplifies this perfectly. A man attracted to a woman's sexuality during courtship later finds that same quality threatening or shameful in his wife, because to maintain his conscious identity as good or pure, he casts sexuality into shadow. He can't integrate his desire with his love, so he splits women into categories, those you desire and those you respect, and wonders why neither relationship satisfies him. But there's another layer driving the intensity of these patterns: the neurochemistry of chaos itself. When your nervous system has been conditioned by early trauma, it develops what's called dopamine dysregulation. Drama, crisis, conflict, and unpredictability trigger dopamine surges that create what behaviorists call variable reward schedules. The same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. You never know when the next reward is coming, so your brain stays locked in heightened activation, scanning for the hit. Neuroscientist Helen Fisher's research using fMRI technology identified that romantic love activates the ventral tegmental area, a dopamine-rich region associated with pleasure, motivation, and focused attention, along with the caudate nucleus and nucleus accumbens. Early romantic love also depletes serotonin, contributing to obsessive thinking, while elevating cortisol, marshaling your body to cope with the crisis of falling in love. This neurochemical cocktail produces an intensity that stable, secure attachment simply cannot match. For those with trauma histories, this intensity becomes confused with aliveness itself. Psychologist Scott Lyons identified what he calls drama bonding. Crisis creating a false sense of belonging because your internal chaos finally has an external match. When the relationship is calm, your nervous system interprets the stillness as dangerous, like the eerie quiet before violence erupts. So you unconsciously create conflict to realign the external environment with your internal state. Not because you're self-sabotaging, but because your body is seeking homeostasis in the only emotional register it recognizes as real. This is why you can know intellectually that the chaotic relationship is destroying you and still feel more alive in it than you ever felt in the peaceful one. Your conscious mind wants health, your nervous system wants familiar, and your shadow uses the chaos as cover to act out every disowned impulse you've been suppressing since childhood. Rage, neediness, sexual hunger, the desire to dominate or submit completely. All under the justification that this is just what love feels like when it's real. Now you understand the architecture. The archetypal templates directing your attractions, the trauma patterns encoding specific features, the shadow seeking what you've disowned, the nervous system mistaking chaos for aliveness. The question becomes, how do you interrupt a process that operates entirely outside conscious awareness? You start by learning to read attraction as diagnostic information rather than divine instruction. When you feel that overwhelming pull towards someone, when your heart races and your thoughts obsess, and you're convinced this person is different, special, the one, pause. That intensity isn't measuring their worthiness. It's measuring the magnitude of your projection. The stronger the attraction, the more of your unlived psyche you're placing on their shoulders to carry for you. Strong reactions of any kind, intense attraction, sudden irritation, immediate fascination, visceral repulsion, signal-activated complexes. Your father complex recognizes its external match. Your anima catches sight of herself. Your shadow sees what you've been hunting for. These reactions tell you where your psyche is still split, where you're seeking externally what can only be integrated internally. The irritation you feel toward your partner's traits often mirrors aspects of yourself you've disowned. If their neediness repels you, examine where you've exiled your own needs to appear independent and strong. If their rigid control enrages you, look for the structure and discipline you've rejected in yourself. If their emotional restraint frustrates you, notice the feelings you've suppressed to be taken seriously in the world. The qualities you idealize reveal what you haven't developed in yourself. You're attracted to their confidence because you've never claimed your own authority. You're fascinated by their creativity because you've abandoned your own artistic impulses. You're drawn to their emotional availability because you've armored against your own vulnerability. This shift from, "Is this the one?" to, "What am I projecting?" transforms every attraction into an opportunity for self-knowledge. But knowing your projections intellectually doesn't dissolve them. Projection withdrawal requires what Jung described as a developmental process with distinct stages. From complete unconsciousness, where you experience your material entirely in the other person, through growing dissonance as reality fails to match your fantasy, to recognition that you've been experiencing the other in here rather than out there, finally arriving at the painful work of seeking the origin of that projected energy within yourself. This process means losing the idealized figure to gain the actual person. It means sacrificing the beloved as savior, as muse, as the one who will finally make you whole. It means facing what Hollis called the otherness of the other, their separate subjectivity, their needs that don't align with yours, their personhood that exists independent of your fantasy about who they should be. Most people find this unbearable. They'd rather preserve the projection and lose the person than dissolve the projection and meet who's actually there. But those willing to endure the disillusionment discover something unexpected. Clearer perception, decreased conflict, increased personal wholeness. You stop fighting with your partner about things that were never about them. You stop expecting them to provide what only you can develop, and you begin to relate to them as a separate center of consciousness rather than a supporting character in your developmental drama. This is where the inner marriage becomes essential, what Jung called the hieros gamos, the sacred union of internal masculine and feminine principles. Not the literal marriage to another person, but the integration of the contrasexual qualities you've been seeking externally. The man cultivating his own feeling capacity, emotional depth, and intuitive knowing. The woman claiming her own logos, her capacity for clear thinking, decisive action, and authority in the world. Jung learned from medieval alchemists, only what is separated may be properly joined. The anima and animus must first be differentiated from mother and father complexes, recognized as internal figures rather than external requirements, and integrated into conscious personality before genuine union with another becomes possible. The quality of your relationship with yourself, how you treat your own feelings, speak to your own vulnerabilities, honor your own needs, becomes the template for every external relationship. Hollis observed, "One can achieve no higher or better relationship with the other than one has achieved with oneself. Self-criticism produces critical relationships. Self-abandonment produces abandoning relationships. Self-compassion produces compassionate relationships. The work isn't finding the right person. The work is becoming whole enough that you no longer need another person to carry the parts of yourself you haven't integrated. Inner work creates the foundation, but there's another layer of healing required, one that happens not in contemplation but in the body itself, in the nervous system that's been wired to interpret chaos as connection and safety as threat. Your brain's neuroplasticity means the patterns aren't permanent. New relational experiences can literally rewire the neural pathways that have been directing your attractions toward familiar pain. Psychiatrist Alan Shore's research on attachment repair demonstrated that consistent therapeutic relationship, or any relationship characterized by attuned presence, empathy, and reliability, can create corrective emotional experience that gradually reshapes internal working models. This happens through co-regulation, your nervous system borrowing regulation from someone else's until those patterns become internalized. When you're with someone whose presence is consistently calm, whose responses are predictable, whose nervous system isn't constantly scanning for threat, your system begins to learn that this steadiness is survivable. Oxytocin released during safe connection, through eye contact, gentle touch, shared laughter, moments of authentic vulnerability, supports this regulatory rewiring. But here's the paradox. Trauma survivors must navigate. Safety feels unsafe. Your nervous system calibrated to chaos. Experiences calm as eerie, the quiet before something breaks. Stable partners feel boring not because they are, but because your body is waiting for the activation it learned to associate with intimacy. The man who calls when he says he will, who shows up consistently, who doesn't create drama. Your system reads this as absence of chemistry rather than presence of health. Choosing consciousness over chemistry means choosing the person your nervous system initially rejects. It means recognizing that the lack of intense attraction might be the healthiest sign, not a red flag. It means understanding that you're not looking for someone who triggers the familiar dopamine surge of variable reward schedules, but someone whose presence gradually teaches your body that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. This is where relationship becomes crucible. What Hollis called the alchemical vessel that cooks the soul. Not through comfortable harmony, but through the heat of friction when projections begin to fail. When your partner refuses to carry your anima, when they set a boundary you experience as rejection, when they reveal themselves as separate from your fantasy about who they should be. These moments provide the necessary heat for transformation. Most people flee this heat. They interpret projection collapse as proof they chose wrong, rather than recognition that they're finally encountering the actual person. They leave to find someone who will carry the projection more convincingly, someone whose mask hasn't slipped yet, but those willing to stay through the disillusionment to hold the tension between their fantasy and the reality standing before them, discover that conflict becomes the vehicle for mutual individuation, not fusion, where boundaries dissolve and two people become one undifferentiated mass, not parallel living, where two people coexist without genuine encounter, but what Jung described as the meeting of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed. This transformation requires ethical responsibility. It means recognizing when you're using another person as a screen for your projections, rather than meeting them as they are. It means asking consistently, does this attraction serve my growth, or does it reenact my wounds? Does this relationship support each person's development toward wholeness? Or does it demand we stay small to preserve the fantasy? Hollis wrote, "If we really love the other as other, we have heroically taken on the responsibility for our own individuation, our own journey. Love as heroism rather than fusion. Love as two people conscious enough to recognize their projections, humble enough to withdraw them, and courageous enough to keep meeting each other through the ongoing work of becoming real. This is what mature love looks like. Not the obliteration of self in merger, but the encounter between two people who have done enough inner work to stop demanding the other complete them. Steady, spacious, quietly alive, not boring, deeply, sustainably real. The chemistry your nervous system craves is often the signal of activated trauma. The calm your system initially rejects might be the first experience of actual safety your body has known. Learning to tolerate this safety, to recognize it as aliveness rather than absence. To choose it even when every conditioned impulse screams for the familiar intensity of chaos. This is the work. Not finding the one, becoming whole enough that love becomes a conscious choice rather than an unconscious compulsion. Thank you for exploring this with me. If this resonated, I invite you to like and subscribe. This work deepens when we're not alone in it. Share this with someone who might recognize themselves here, and leave a comment with your reflections. Thank you for doing this consciousness work. See you in the next exploration.